In terms of the connections between family life and family worship and the gathering of the church as a whole, I think that family worship into public worship trajectory is very, very helpful. Again, if you're talking about people who don't have much experience of this, who've never had the opportunity for this, or say you've got a recently converted dad or mum, dad and mum become believers, and they're saying, so where do we start with our kids? We want them to have something that we were never given. Okay, so we would typically say, let your family worship be a little echo of corporate worship. And it helps your children to learn expectations, helps them to learn to sit, to listen, to engage at an appropriate age. There's a danger. Don't load the Heidelberg on a 3-year-old unless they're an unusual 3-year-old. That's not going to work. But the typical elements: read your Bible together, sing together, pray together, engage about what you're reading and singing, and we would typically encourage people to add a catechism. Now this is where that orality becomes so important. That we're not just reading something and saying, that's good, that's true, that's clever, that's nicely put. What we're trying to do is accumulate truth and drive it down into the depths of our memory. In that way, it becomes useful, not only so that we can understand what God has made known and ourselves in relation to Him, it actually becomes a wonderful tool for discipling and even evangelizing others. So sometimes say, for example, in the shorter cat, what is sin? Sin is any lack of conformity unto or transgression of the law of God. If someone says, so what is sin then? Now, you don't necessarily just recite the catechism, but you've got that basic, excellent, thoughtful, precise definition at your fingertips. So this is how you want to do this with your children, depending again on their age. If they're very, very young, I mean, we've even started with some basic British Sign Language for our kids, so they knew that God made me before they were really able to say God made me. And then when you come into the shorter catechism, what is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Now, that's a pretty big chunk if you've never done that before, but it's that very, very clear question and answer structure. So you might start with your son or your daughter, yourself or your wife, your husband. What is the chief end of man? Man's chief end is to glorify God. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever, and to enjoy Him forever. And you might do that 2 or 3 times. And then you put it together. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And you repeat it. And initially that's going to take a few minutes. And yet you start to pick it up. Now the important thing is that tomorrow you don't just go on to question 2. You repeat question 1 with its answer. And then you move on to question 2. And you start learning that. So that over time you're layering down, and these forms of words, these rhythms, the cadences, the poetry, and the development as a whole in theological structure through the catechism becomes the air that you breathe. So when we come to do that then in Sunday school, it's less learning and it's more rehearsing what's been learned. In our adult Bible class, I will typically write down the answers on a whiteboard, color-coded, so people can see the structure, and then we'll put it into the big picture of the catechism as a whole, because what we don't want is this to simply remain at the level of rote learning. That's the first stage. You just parrot it back. But what we want people to do is to understand what it is they have learned, so that there is not just the ability to frame the answer in accurate and careful and precise speech, but there's an understanding of an appreciation for and response to this, so that your baby's systematic theology gets into your spiritual bloodstream and helps you to understand, what God has said.